Hi, smart moms and dads. Welcome to another episode of the Brainy Moms podcast brought to you today by Learning Arcs Brain Training Centers. I'm Dr. Amy Moore here with Sandy Zamalis. Sandy and I are going to bring you a conversation with Jennifer Berger. Jennifer is the executive director of Ready, Set, Screen and has been a media literacy expert for 2 decades. Through her previous work, Jennifer taught more than 10,000 youth how to question media messages and improve their mental health. She has a BA in Communication Studies from the University of Michigan, Ann Arbor, but she considers her in-classroom media literacy educator work her most valuable education. She is here to talk to us about her new program called the Social Media Driver's License. So let's welcome her. Hi, Jennifer. We're so excited to have this conversation with you today.
Thanks for having me. I love it.
Here's why I'm so excited to talk to you today. We've had conversations about teens and social media on several different episodes, and none of them have truly aligned with my belief about teens and social media use and teens and phone use. In fact, I've gotten some backlash for some of the stands that I have taken on not using the phone as a consequence for teenagers. For example, don't take your phone away, your kid's phone away. And my belief as a psychologist is, this is research-based, but connection is the number one buffer against mental health crisis. And when we sever that connection, we're, I think, doing more harm than good. And so this becomes not a black and white issue, but let's talk about boundaries and negotiation and healthy use of social media and phones. And so when I read your bio, when I looked at your application to be on our show, I thought, finally, we're going to have an entire conversation with someone who aligns with what I think is the healthiest way to view social media and phone use in teens.
That is wonderful. Yeah, and I had not found any program, product, or anything that did not have a severely monitoring kind of mentality to it. And that was really frustrating for me as someone who had been teaching teens for so long, the way I had with my organization that taught media literacy, teaches media literacy. And so it was very similar for me in a lot of ways. I was like, teens are not going to vibe with this. Like, how can we make it natural for them? And how can we make it more natural and collaborative for parents instead of the monitoring bit of it, which I'm sure we'll get into.
Yeah. And I think that how does that train self-regulation skills when we're doing all the regulating?
Exactly. Kids need to learn, especially in this age group that we're working with, ages 10 to 14 or so, 8 to 15, 7 to 16. It really has everything to do with self-regulation when kids are online because they're not with you. They're not with parents. They're on their own. They're out on their own. I talk about it like you've sent them out into a field. You don't know where they are. Exactly. You've sent them into what can be a seedy bar sometimes. And without skills that we can teach them and media literacy skills to really be able to self-regulate and be able to make their own judgment to the best of their ability about what's okay and what's not and what to do if it's not, then we are doing them the best service we possibly can.
So let's start at the beginning. How do you help parents and families or educators really start the process of media literacy education with our kids?
Our newest release is called the Social Media Driver's License. And what we try to do there first, essentially, is give everybody a level set background and set of education, set of information about how social media works and how to have these different conversations with your parents and how to have these conversations with your kids. all around, really. So it's 360 degrees. There are 2 tracks essentially in the social media driver's license course, which, by the way, really functions to give the kids the skills that they need in order to make their way on the internet, online social media, and using a smartphone. And it also gives their parents the opportunity to give their kids an incentive to learn more before they are given a smartphone, for example, or a social media account, allowed to have a social media account. And the 2 tracks are a course for kids and teens, which is a 10-session, 20-minute per session course, pretty significant and comprehensive, that where older teens are giving the kids who are watching advice essentially on what they've learned about social media and smartphones and what they want to pass on to them. So it's not a talking head, it's not a parent, it's not an adult saying wah wah. It's teenagers, older teenagers. And then the parallel track is an audio course for parents that talks about each session of the kids course and talks about some of the things that the kids are learning, but then goes deeper into parent talk, goes deeper into the serious things that, like online predators, for example. We don't really talk directly with kids about online predators in this course for various reasons, including not scaring them too much. But we go to a different level with the parent companion, as we call it.
And then do you give advice to the parent on how to talk to their kids about predators?
Yes, we absolutely do. We have a specialist who we spoke with during the podcast, who audio course, we call it podcast too, but it's inside the course, who is an internet safety specialist for parents, who gives some really great tips and really good advice based on her own experience, actually, as a person who was almost a victim of an online predator. But it's not just that. It's also, how do you have these conversations with your kids about their own tech use, about their digital wellness, as we call it, creating habits that are going to be good for them on their own in a self-regulating way and not a top-down way always. It takes a combination of those 2 things. But we talk a lot about what kids won't respond to. And we talk with a parenting specialist who works with resolving conflict between parents and kids, who gives some really excellent advice for parents how to have these conversations in a way, again, that is collaborative, that meets the kids where they are and becomes a true conversation instead of, okay, sign this contract, like sign this tech agreement for our family right now that doesn't change for the next 3 years, a thing. So the advice, it goes deep, essentially.
You're trying to create connection, it sounds like, really. You're really trying to track and help parents understand the nuances, but also reach the kids. And I love the fact that you're using like a driver's analogy. So it feels like a learner's permit, right? Where you have to demonstrate a maturity, you have to demonstrate that you're able to handle the tools. And how do you help parents navigate when there is a blip, right? Or if the child makes a misstep, and if we're not trying to put really harsh and hard boundaries, but instead help them grow and learn to use the tool safely, what do you tell parents for when those hiccups happen? Because they will.
One of our experts who is on our audio course talks about the best thing that her mom had done for her, which was the blip occurred. Something happened. She posted a picture of herself that she shouldn't have. She sent a photo to another person who she shouldn't have. And the story essentially was like, my mother was very calm. She was freaking out inside. And instead of freaking out at me, She kept it calm and asked me questions. And she also had the point of view in this story and what other many the psychotherapists who we had on, everybody was essentially says, everything can be fixed. This is not the end of the world. Like what happened here, and I don't really mean to dismiss it by saying not the end of the world, but this is not the end of everything. Like this is just something that happens. And the more that we can speak to them that way, and the more that we can hear them instead of judging, the better off we really are going to be with kids.
So how did you find yourself at this philosophy, right? Was this if you can't beat them, join them, they're going to get phones anyway? Or did you come at this from a different perspective?
I came at it from a perspective of being a media literacy educator for about 20 years, working with so many teenagers who felt like they were alone because their parents were villainizing their world, their media, their phone, it wasn't phone 20 years ago, but their stuff that they really liked. And I really came to the conclusion just by working with them that they weren't really being listened to. And that just went on for all the years that I have been doing that work, like up until now. When I first was doing this work, I was pretty young. So I was coming at it from the teenager perspective. Like that's what I could understand at that time. And I think that really has benefited the work overall. But as, time went forward and I saw things like the teen media literacy as I saw things like the teen mental health crisis hitting the newspapers and Meta and other companies that have social media products really not helping kids at all stay safe and in many ways harming them. And the legislators not keeping kids safe either. And schools not having the funding that they needed to really institute the really excellent levels of media literacy that are actually available but are not funded right now. I realized that, guess what? We need a stopgap measure. Like something terrible is happening. Kids are committing suicide. Kids are ending up in the emergency room after committing self-harm at rates we have not seen before, and talking about how the things that created these feelings for them came from social media. And I just was so horrified and so saddened by that. But I knew that I had been teaching the right skills for so long that I couldn't not create this. I couldn't not create the social media driver's license. Just seeing how much prevention would have helped, would have perhaps actually stopped that, and will also prevent the next teen mental health crisis that might be coming down the pipe, which is why we're reaching 10 to 14-year-olds and not 15 to 18-year-olds at this time. We're going for mental health outcomes prevention right now. So the last piece of that really is that they are going to get phones anyway. We can absolutely wait. Jonathan Haidt, his book, The Anxious Generation, one of the pieces of advice is wait until they're 16. There's wait until 8 that talks about not giving your kids a phone until after 8th grade. And my perspective is that is all great. Please, parents, please do that. Like we should all do that. And also eventually they are going to get their phone. So then what happens? And so what the social media driver's license does is it helps us be ready for that moment.
So I'm pausing for a minute because we had a conversation about Jonathan Haidt's book right before you popped on. I've historically enjoyed his work, but I found that the anxious generation was a sweeping generalization of the actual state of mental health among adolescents, that the most recent meta-analytic work that has come out and looked at the correlation is what he was saying, right? But the association between social media and phone use and teen mental health isn't nearly as strong as he made it seem, that it's so nuanced, and that those relationships that we have with our kids are contributors. The relationships that they have in person with one another are contributors. The tragedy that COVID lockdowns created in severing social connection, contributors, right? There's so many contributors. And so I think social media is a huge piece, and that what you're doing is phenomenal, right?
Thank
That's
you.
a piece that we actually can speak into, that we actually can give tangible things to help our kids make responsible choices, healthy choices. Whereas working on those in-person relationships is harder.
Can you clarify a little bit for me about the in-person relationship, working on the in-person relationships?
Sure. Teaching, I'm just going to use one example. So teaching families to set limits on social media use, right? That is a tangible task that, hey, here's some tips for how to have that conversation. Here's how to collaborate on creating those limits and those boundaries, right? Which can have dramatic impacts, right? Those limits are going to have big impacts. Teaching every family how to communicate effectively in all situations is a larger task. And it's influenced by how you were parented, how your parents are continuing to tell you how you should parent your child, your culture, your socioeconomic status, the parenting style that you have adopted, right? And then once you've adopted a parenting style, you entrench yourself in it, right? And you're not super open to trying a different one, right? So it is a bigger, more complex task to coach those in-person daily relationships within family ecosystems, and then the friendship ecosystems at school and in after school activities. So it's just bigger than training a tangible conversation around setting boundaries over social media. So like, you've identified something that is doable.
Yeah, the interpersonal relationships. Yes, the interpersonal relationship aspect is what I'm hearing. And there was a lot right there. And I want to say, do agree. And I don't really want to agree or disagree necessarily about what the science says, but you're absolutely right that whether it's happening or not, whether social media is to blame, whether smartphones are to blame, we know there is some sort of problem happening with smartphones
Absolutely.
and social media. What is the most humanitarian thing that we can do about this? Not ridding everyone of their smartphones or taking every smartphone away from 13-year-olds or any of that. But it does fall into the zone for me of we don't really know, and it's really hard to study all of these factors. And so what can we do?
Yeah.
It's like some of the like British laws and European laws around dangerous substances, around chemicals and things like that. We're not exactly sure, but we don't like it right now. And so let's do something at least. But yes, those to speak to the interpersonal skill piece. There are a lot of things. I'm not as much in the business of being like, here's how you have this conversation with your child, because I'm not an actual parenting expert. I'm a media literacy expert. What I do know is what doesn't work. And what I do know is when you're saying this entrenched way of parenting, we all know that when kids become teenagers, It's like your kitten has become a cat, where it's a different, this is a different person. This is a different world in a lot of ways. How do parents adjust their parenting for that? And one of the things is not villainizing their media, like not shutting down the conversation, not creating super rigid rules that are top down where you've had no conversation about it, because the kids will just, most kids, I should say, many kids will act out against that and will be sneaky, even if they have seemed up until like age 9 as being like a quote unquote good kid. This is just how the teenage mind works, right? It's asserting independence. It's asserting agency. They want agency. They want to make their own decisions. They don't want to be told what to do. They don't want to be lectured to. I would say that there are a lot more ways that parents can turn their kids off to coming to them, to having the conversation with them, than there are perfect ways to have the conversation.
Sure, but saying no is paralyzing. And it's not just with teenagers. It's a phenomenon called psychological reactance.
Yes.
That when we are told no, it makes us want to do the thing even more. The difference is, as adults, we have fully formed prefrontal cortexes, right? So
Yep.
we're able to reason through, why are we being told no? Maybe I should consider some of these reasons, right? And that is not happening when we are emotional and when
Afraid.
Sure, right? Because that is a fear-based reaction. You're going to take it away. I'm not going to be able to see my friends. I'm not going to be able to know what's going on in the world. Like, those are all fears that then create additional resistance for sure.
But then the parent fears that create these rigid rules are also in play, right? Where the parents, I'm just really afraid that she's going to be contacted by someone, and like this type of understandable, completely understandable, but like these fears of what social media or what the smartphone could do to their kids is paralyzing them as well.
I was going to say that. I think it's a game of whack-a-mole, I think, for parents a lot, because the problem is that the tech for kids now is so much more advanced than anything we grew up with. So we're constantly playing catch up and trying to figure out where all the loopholes are and what's happening. And it is a full-time job to try to keep up with that. So I love, from that social media expert side of things where, there's a place you can go to actually find out what's happening, what's current, what should we be super mindful on, so that you're not just operating out of fear. Because the reality is, it isn't about the phone anymore. Kids have their Chromebooks. They have their watches. They may not have a phone, but they've got access to the internet in everything that they do, and their video games. It's not just about social media anymore. The internet has just blown that wide open, and it's only going to get more pervasive into how many ways that they can access the internet. So I'm with you, I think, Jennifer. More education is going to help everybody feel more comfortable, because it's not going to go away. And so, yeah, you can say no to a phone. Okay. Like, your child's going to find another way.
The internet is ubiquitous.
The internet's everywhere. They'll go to the library.
And one thing, the way that we define social media actually absolutely goes beyond the phone. Right. The phone is the crux of the whole thing, really. Once you give your kids a phone, there it is right in their hand. But what it is, it can be YouTube. It can be in-game chats where people are talking to each other. There's a lot of content going on right there. It can be texting. It can be all of these different things. So it doesn't have to be a social media company, a social media platform to influence them, just what you're saying. But it's just so, the whack-a-mole metaphor I have heard many times now, and it's just not fair what we expect of parents right now. Like what the culture expects of parents as far as keeping up with all of that. And watching everything and doing parents have enough. There was enough before this. And it feels very unfair to me. And then you can't turn to the schools necessarily to do it. And you can't turn to someone else, and the government isn't fixing it. Not that I don't really think that it really would anyway, that any rules could really be properly enforced because of the social media companies. And so it's really all on parents. And a recent study showed that 66% of parents were totally overwhelmed by their kids' tech-full lives, essentially. And what we plan to do with the social media driver's license and our organization Ready, Set, Screen is to keep parents up on those things so they have an idea. But in no way would I ever want parents to feel like they have to know what all of the features in Snapchat are. They need to know what all the different things you can do and the things I need to be worried about. And that's exactly this playing whack-a-mole is exactly what we try to avoid by giving kids the skills that they need to start forming good judgment, at least, to start being smart and independent and balanced about their tech use.
I love that approach too, because everything, to your point, like everything in the media, it's all fear-based. Like the movie, just a couple, or a Netflix special, Adolescence or whatever, that just came out, was just terrifying. And if that's the input parents are getting, they need a neutral resource that just gives them helpful tools and information and doesn't scare their pants off of them in terms of wanting to lock their kids in the basement, never to see the light.
Never to see the light of day.
That's right. Be safe.
Gonna chain you to your bedpost.
I know. No.
There is so much to be, that's not what I mean. There is so much reporting. There are so many stories that we can learn about. There are so many, like sextortion, scams, and a million different things. And if you just watch that go by, then you will be terrified, because the things that happen are terrifying. And it's just like with kidnappings. It's just with stranger danger. It's just like with all of it. If you let that consume you and you let the stories become trends, become truths in your mind, then you'll just be more afraid over and over again. And so we're like fighting fear with knowledge, essentially, is what we're trying to do. In a really non-judgmental way too. Just like not interested in judging parents for whether they let their kids look at their tablet or iPad while they're making dinner. These kinds of things that are, of course, recommended by the American Pediatric Association, for example, but are just, for some people, a lot of people, just not realistic, essentially. So it's not what it's about. It's not about your kid should only have 30 minutes of screen time or 0 minutes of screen time per day. And they should put their phone down when they come in the room, and they should never have the phone at the dinner table. And I am not saying any of those things are bad. I'm just saying, if you make these, like I keep saying, if you keep making these really rigid rules and not having conversations, then you're in big trouble.
So does your program address pornography?
It addresses, on the kid side, it addresses what to do when you come across, quote, inappropriate surprises. Because again, this is for 10 to 14-year-olds. We don't know what they've seen and what they haven't seen, and we don't want to be the ones to tell them about this. Sure. We know that kids are seeing pornography earlier and earlier, and sometimes it's not of their own choosing. A lot of the time it's not of their own choosing to look at it. And so the conversation about these inappropriate surprises that we bring to light for the kids is really, you are going to come across something that you don't think you should be seeing, or that you know that your parent or caregiver does not want you to see. Here's what to do about that. Almost every adult understands what is happening with you and as far as what you might have seen. And feeling shame, you might feel shame, and that is natural. And you might feel badly about having seen it, or maybe, I don't think we really say maybe you looked for it, but it really talks about it being like an accidental thing, because that's really the majority of this kind of thing. Talk to your trusted adult. And we even guide them through a process of identifying 3 trusted adults in their lives before we even get into any of the information, really, because it's not always your parent who you can talk to about that. We just don't want to assume. Go tell your mom or dad that this happened. There are other people you also can talk to potentially. So come up with your list of 3. It could be your aunt. It could be your grandpa. It could be your school counselor. It could be your coach. A lot of different people. And so talk to them about what you've seen and know that they're there to help you out and that you did not do anything wrong.
And then do you have a corresponding lesson on the parent side? Hey, if your child accidentally comes across this and they come to you, this is how you should not respond versus this is our suggested response.
We have not addressed it specifically. We talked more about, yes, and there are other resources out there. There are other great resources, a lot of sex education resources. And so what we tried to do with our audio course really is talk about things in a way that parents that we all haven't heard yet, essentially. Like you can't find a conversation very easily about this thing called the manosphere that is talking to boys in ways that most of us do not want our boys to be thinking about women, and a variety of different icky things that you might come across, and talking with parents about how to handle that. Because once again, it's actually maybe not all about pornography. It's actually about like how you are connecting with your children in the first place, right? That will help you deal with things like accidental or on purpose pornography exposure.
I've never heard of the manosphere.
It's a terrifying group of misogynists who they're influencers. The most famous one is Andrew Tate. And a lot of times what happens is that these influencers show up on YouTube, for example, or really any of the social media platforms. But on YouTube, a study was done that shows that this is what happens. Like, for example, if a young man is looking for bodybuilding content, and we talked to a parent who has this is exactly her story. Her son is looking for bodybuilding content. He's interested in fitness. He's not like in the supplements world. He's not looking for steroids. He's just a good kid who like wants to work out. And he ends up coming across the supplement people, like definitely some dangerous supplements and money wasting supplements. But then also it gets more and more extreme because of the YouTube algorithm, or a lot of these algorithms, to keep the kids engaged, to keep people engaged. And so some of the influencers out there are men who are talking about why women are horrible, how they don't have brains, skills, abilities, so on and so forth. I don't really want to repeat on a lot of it. Honestly, I think we can all imagine.
Sure.
But then she said that her son is like coming to the dinner table and being like, I have to be strong because women are so weak, or like some kind of like stuff that their family does not ascribe to because they believe in equality in their household. And the mom and dad are like, how do I even talk to him about this? They don't even really know what to say because it's like nothing that they would have ever said in their family, but they know that their child got it online. So the questions have to start. It has to be like, where did you learn that? That's
Okay, so I
interesting.
learned it in the manosphere.
We are
I mean,
calling
I'm sure
it.
he doesn't say it that way, but
Yeah,
he's
I don't know.
Yeah, this guy. Okay. He seemed really
too,
cool.
right? And so then as parents, you go, you're never listening to that guy again, or tell me more.
Don't stop listening to that stuff. That's garbage. We don't think that. And then the conversation has ended. Like that is the end of that conversation. Forever. So that child goes off and goes and does whatever he wants, really. I want to say that the expert who we talked with about this, with this parent, along with this parent, and by the way, that's what the parent audio course is all about, is a parent talking with an expert on the topic. So it's a conversation between a parent and an expert that leads to, what do I do about that though? And some really good, solid advice for parents. But the expert who we spoke with was Andrew Reiner, who wrote a book called Better Boys, Better Men, that is really all about that his opinion is that boys do not have resilience. Various things about our culture right now that are off topic probably for this conversation, but that just because they're not talking doesn't mean that they don't have something to say.
Yeah.
So that's been a fascinating experience, like learning about that, but also just learning about some of the other many experiences that parents have been having, like their daughter turning to them with their phone and being like, what do I say when she says this? Like a text. Coach me on my texting, like right now. Like she said this mean thing to me. Do I write something really mean back, or do I try to de-escalate this? But it's, Mom, what do I say?
I love that the daughter's even asking them.
Of course.
Yeah.
But as anyone who has daughters knows, there can also be too much conversation sometimes. So a balance must be had.
So you say that, that teens love to talk about technology, right? And so even though we might hear the Peanuts teacher as they're talking about Snapchat and Instagram and all that, they want to share their lives and what's important in their lives with us. And so what are some tips that you have for parents what are some tips you have when your kid comes to you and is all excited about technology and you hear the Peanuts teacher?
Don't let on that you hate it. Don't let on that you don't want to know about it. Like with many of their interests. Oh, let me see. Tell me more. Like you're just indicating that it's safe to talk about what they see online with you. You don't have to do it. You don't have to get on Snapchat. You don't have to learn how to use any of it, but it's, oh, let me see. Oh, that's really funny. Oh, that's really cool, or whatever. And also just, like I said, just not villainizing. This is their life. Some of our parents who like hated TV, for example, or hated sugary cereals, let us know all the time, right? So what did we do when we weren't with them? A lot of the time, watch way too much TV and eat too much sugary cereal. So be there with them. Be there. Watch them play the game. Play the game with them if they'll play the game with you. But they want to talk. It seems like they don't want to talk about it. They're like, Mom, stop it. But they do want to talk. They just don't want to be lectured. They don't want you to do all the talking. They want you to do all the asking. And you're showing them by doing the asking that it's okay to talk about it and that you're interested. That is a kind of basic parenting advice, honestly, that a lot of parenting experts have given over the years. But it is really important, and it bears repeating over and over again, really.
Yeah, absolutely. Because A lot of times as parents, you see yourself as the expert. So your child comes to you, asks you for advice, you give out the advice, and you move on to the next topic. But you are a little bit paralyzed when you're like, oh no, they want to talk about this, and I don't know about this. So how cool is it then that you can just turn things around as a question?
Right. That's like the joy. I have so much respect for today's teenagers. I truly do. And that's one of the great things about teenagers is that they have their own thoughts. You talk to a 6-year-old about this stuff, and maybe they have some basic ideas they want to talk about on a certain topic, but like a teenager, you really don't have to be an expert. You don't have to be an expert on the platforms, on the social media platforms. You don't have to be an expert on YouTube. You don't have to be an expert on really like any of the features of any of these things. You have to become an expert at asking more questions that don't sound judgmental, that are literally open questions. So that really is, I would say that is the biggest challenge, is like, what questions are going to be your standard go-tos as you go into life with a tween who's turning into a teen?
Yeah. Good advice. Okay. So Jennifer, when does this course come out? When is it available? How can our listeners find more about it?
The course will be available by the time this podcast airs, and that should be by May 23rd. What we hope is that parents will want to take advantage of this little like dead zone between the end of school and the beginning of summer activities, or the end of summer activities and the beginning of school next year, to give their kids this education, especially if their kids are dying for a phone. And it will be available nationwide. It will be available online, and we will have a sliding scale. So even if some families are not able to afford our starting price, which we haven't quite determined yet, as of this recording, there will be ways, because we're a nonprofit. We're not a for-profit. Our goal is for accessibility.
And so that website is socialmediadriverslicense.org.
That website to go to is socialmediadriverslicense.org. And you can find out all the information you need, and you can enroll in the course.
Fantastic. Anything that you want to leave our listeners with that you didn't get to talk about today?
Oh, thank you for asking that. I always try to ask that as well. I think just know that as the parent of a teen or tween, you're working with someone who is much more turning into an adult and can start having conversations that sound like adult conversations, not inappropriate adult conversations, just more grown-up conversations than they used to be able to. I think give them that credit, love them through that, and make sure they have the knowledge that they need to make their own decisions in the future once they leave your nest.
Yeah, I think that's fantastic advice, because if they don't learn that in the safety of our home, they're going to learn it somewhere.
That's right. That's right.
Jennifer Berger, thank you so much for being with us today, for sharing your wisdom on this super important topic. We really appreciate you taking time to be with us.
Thank you so much, Dr. Amy. And thank you, Sandy. I really appreciate the time. And I hope that your listeners got something good out of this.
I'm sure they got lots of cool things.
Amazing.
Important too.
Amazing. Great.
So speaking of listeners, thank you for being with us today. If you like us, please find us on Instagram and Facebook at The Brainy Moms. You can watch us on YouTube at The Brainy Moms, and you can go to our website, thebrainymoms.com. If you would like to see Sandy's work in action, be sure to hop over to TikTok and find her at The Brain Trainer Lady. Look, this is all the smart stuff we have for you today. We hope you feel a little smarter, so we're going to catch you next time.